do it. The world is often unkind to new talent, new creations. The new needs friends. Anton Ego. 1. Louisa is a teenager, the best kind of human. The evidence for this is very simple. Little children think teenagers are the best humans, and teenagers think teenagers are the best humans. The only people who don't think that teenagers are the best humans are adults, which is obviously because adults are the worst kind of humans. It's one of the last days before Easter. Very soon, Louisa is going to be thrown out of an art auction for vandalizing a valuable painting. Old ladies will shriek, and the police will come, and it really wasn't planned. Not to brag, but Louisa did have a perfect plan. It wasn't the plan's fault that she didn't stick to it. Because sometimes Louisa is a genius, but sometimes she isn't a genius, and the problem is that the genius and the non-genius share a brain. But the plan? Perfect. The auction is one where extremely rich people go to buy ridiculously expensive art, so teenagers aren't welcome there. Especially not teenagers with backpacks full of cans of spray paint. Rich adults have seen far too much news about activists who break in and vandalize famous paintings, so for that reason the entrance is protected by security guards weighing 300 pounds with 0 ounces of humor. They're the sort of guards who have so much muscle that they have muscles that don't even have Latin names, because back when people spoke Latin, idiots as big as this didn't even exist yet. But that shouldn't have been a problem, because the plan was for Louisa to get in without the guards even noticing she was there. The only problem with the plan was that Louisa was the person who was going to carry it out. But it started well, it has to be said, because the building where the auction is being held is an old church. We know that because all the rich people at the auction keep saying to each other, "Did you know this is an old church?" Because rich people love reminding each other about how incredibly rich they are. So rich that they can buy things from God. In a couple of days at the start of Easter, obviously no one in the room will spare a thought for God, because then God won't have anything interesting to sell to them. But the thing that's so incredible about God is that God understands people's needs, so there are always bathrooms in churches. So Louisa broke in through one of the bathroom windows, in full accordance with the plan. Her friend Fish taught her how to do that. Fish is the best at everything. For instance, the best at losing things and the best at breaking things, but she is the best of all at breaking into things. And Louisa? She's bad at pretty much everything, but good at being angry. Not to brag, but she's actually world-class at that. And she's particularly angry about rich people buying art, because rich people are the worst sort of adults, and the worst way to vandalize art is actually to put a damn price tag on it. That's why rich adults hate the sort of thing that Louisa paints on the walls of buildings, not because they love walls, but because they hate the fact that there are beautiful things that are free. So Louisa got in through the window with a backpack full of cans of spray paint and a perfect plan. When she tumbled onto the floor inside the bathroom, she stopped for a while and painted a very realistic portrait of the guards on the wall. A more shallow artist might have chosen to portray them as bulls, seeing as their necks were so thick it was impossible to tell where their heads began. But Louisa would never do that, because she can see inside people. So she painted the guards as jellyfish, because jellyfish, like guards, have neither backbones nor brains. Then she put on a white dress shirt and snuck into the crowd. It has to be said that Louisa hates many things about herself, but most of all her height and her weight. She's wished for many things throughout her childhood, but perhaps none greater than to be smaller. She doesn't like her body because there's too much of it. She doesn't like her voice because it's too deep. She doesn't like her brain because it always tells her to talk when she's nervous. Most of all, she doesn't like her heart because it's always nervous. Stupid, stupid heart. Bearing all this in mind, you might of course think that someone ought to have noticed her when she stepped into the old church. But first you have to realize that rich adults hardly ever notice anything apart from mirrors. There are expensive paintings hanging on all the walls, each masterpiece followed by an even grander one, but the room is full of people busily trying to see their hairstyles in the reflection of their champagne glasses. One group of cheerful women are taking photographs, not of the art, but of each other. A group of serious men are talking about their favorite paintings, not as works of art, but as investments, as if they were framed banknotes. Then the men start talking about golf instead, and the women laugh loudly at something fantastic, because everything in their lives is the best. Everyone is so wonderful, and isn't it amazing that this building is an old church? Obviously, none of them dares to actually talk about the paintings on the walls. They're far too frightened of accidentally thinking the wrong thing. Someone else needs to think something first so they can know what they're allowed to love. One of the women returns from the bathroom and looks horrified because someone has painted graffiti on the walls in there. The paint smelled, and now the woman has a migraine. Graffiti? How awful! Vandalism! One of the women exclaims, but one of the other women whispers, "But do you think the graffiti is part of the exhibition? Do you think it's art?" Panic spreads through the group like pee in a tent, because what if they're wrong? The women hurry over to the men who are talking about golf to ask if it's art. One of the men asks, "Is there a price tag?" Then the women shake their heads and laugh. No price tag, no art. Oh, what a relief. The men point at the walls and talk about investments again. When they talk about the very best investment in the whole church, they point at one painting and say, "The one of the sea," as if that's all it is. Blue and expensive. Angry? Louisa can't understand how she could possibly be anything else. Around the men and women, wait staff in white shirts circulate, serving hors d'oeuvres, because rich people love tiny food. Everything else should be big, except for taxes and sandwiches. No one looks the wait staff in the eye. Staff means so little to rich adults that they don't even react to the fact that one of them is carrying a backpack. Louisa moves gently through the crowd. If you've always felt too big, you get pretty good at not being in the way. So it isn't until she catches sight of the painting she's looking for that she suddenly starts to panic. Because it makes her so happy. She imagines everyone else there must be able to hear her stupid, stupid heart beating in her chest. But no one reacts. Not so strange, of course, because if you're an adult, you've forgotten how that sounds. The One of the Sea was painted by the world-famous artist C. Yacht. It's the most expensive painting in the whole auction, so everyone wants it, not for what it is, but because of its story. It is said to be the very first picture that C. Yacht painted at 14 years old, a prodigy. That was how his career started. But the men talking about golf don't care about that. They eagerly tell the women who are drinking champagne that the picture, most of all, is such a damn fine investment because of other rumors altogether. Because the newspapers say that the artist is a drug addict, that he's in such bad shape that he no longer goes out at all. So if the buyer is really lucky, he might die. Imagine what the painting would be worth then. Everyone laughs. Louisa clenches her fists. The painting is already expensive. So expensive, in fact, that there's a velvet rope hanging in front of it. So incredibly special that if a poor person accidentally breathed too close to it, it might be offended. Next to the rope stands a small old woman draped in diamonds, looking very unhappy, which, in her defense, is probably the only way her face can look. Seeing as it has had so much plastic surgery, it looks like a sneaker that's been tied too tightly. "Here's the One of the Sea," she hisses unhappily to her husband, because the painting is smaller than she had imagined. Presumably the poor thing had imagined the sea being bigger. Her husband, an old man with a watch the size of a grown turtle and pants so tight his butt looks like it has its own butt, doesn't even look at the painting. He just reads the sign next to it to see the estimated auction price. He looks happy, because not just anyone can buy paintings like this, and that means the old man isn't just anyone. The woman says it's a shame that it isn't orange, because they have a lot of orange furnishings in the summer house this year. She says this in a tone that suggests she is also irritated that ice cream isn't more like pickles, or that doorknobs aren't more like opera. As if it is rather rude of the world not to adapt to her every wish at all times. "Perhaps we could put it in an orange frame, Charles," she suggests. But the old man doesn't answer, because his mouth is full of tiny sandwiches. Louisa hates them all. The men who invest, and the women who photograph, and the old woman who decorates, and the old man who consumes. God, how she hates them. You have to know that, because otherwise you can't understand what a painting can do to a person. In her backpack, Louisa has, apart from cans of spray paint, her passport and an old postcard, which says in very shaky handwriting, "It's so beautiful here. The sun shines every day. Miss you. See you soon. Mom." You need to know that, too, to understand that once Louisa has crept through the crowd and is finally standing by the rope in front of the painting that everyone else there thinks is of the sea, she is no longer standing in an old church. She isn't alone. She isn't even angry, not even with her friend Fish, who was so good at breaking into places but so bad at getting out again. Once, Fish and Louisa broke into a tattoo parlor in the middle of the night and they tattooed each other. Louisa drew a heart on Fish's upper arm, and it was the most beautiful heart Fish had ever seen. Then Fish did a tattoo on Louisa's lower arm, and it really was remarkably ugly, almost incomprehensibly hideous, because Fish was the best at almost everything, but terrible at drawing. It was a tattoo of a one-armed man in a tree, and Louisa has never loved any picture more. The first time she and Fish met in a group foster home where no one dared to sleep, Fish had whispered jokes to her all night. Her favorite was, "How do you get a one-armed man down from a tree? You wave at him." No one could laugh at their own jokes the way Fish did. Louisa had never heard a better sound or met a bigger person. Sometimes Fish broke into ice cream parlors at night because there weren't many things she liked more than ice cream. But more often she broke into paint shops because Louisa needed cans of spray paint. One time she broke into a hardware shop because they needed screwdrivers, but 100 times she broke into the back doors of movie theaters so they could sneak into late-night screenings because there weren't many things Louisa loved more than movies. As 17-year-olds, they would sleep next to each other almost every night in the foster home, with ice cream stains on their clothes and each other's laughter in their lungs, a chest of drawers against the door, each clutching a screwdriver in case anyone tried to get in. You get used to so many strange things when you grow up without parents. You soon get so used to having one single person who you love that it's impossible to shake the habit. Louisa hurt, but Fish hurt more. Louisa hated reality, but Fish really couldn't stand it. Louisa tried drugs a few times, but Fish couldn't stop. Louisa was still 17 when Fish turned 18 and wasn't allowed to stay at the foster home any longer. Fish promised Louisa that it would be all right, but Louisa was her only good person, and after enough nights apart, Fish found other types of people. She fled from reality, down into bottles, out into the fog. Adults always think they can protect children by stopping them from going to dangerous places, but every teenager knows that's pointless, because the most dangerous place on earth is inside us. Fragile hearts break in palaces and in dark alleys alike. Louisa has now been alone on the planet for 3 weeks, because that was when all the adults lied and said that Fish had committed suicide. It wasn't true. No adult missed Fish when she died. No one does if you're an orphan and grow up in 10 different foster homes. It's so easy, then, to just blame the fact that she took an overdose of pills. But Louisa knows the truth. Fish was murdered by reality. She was suffocated by the claustrophobia of being trapped on this planet. She died of being sad all the time. You have to know all this about Louisa. Otherwise, you can't understand what a painting can mean. That there is a speed at which a heart can beat that you can't remember when you've stopped being young. There is art that can be so beautiful that it makes a teenager too big for her body. There is a sort of happiness so overwhelming that it is almost unbearable. Your soul seems to kick its way through your bones. You can see a painting, and for a single moment of your life, just for a single breath, you can forget to be afraid. If you've ever experienced that, you know how it feels. If not, there probably isn't any way to explain it. Because it isn't a painting of the sea. Only a damn adult would think that. 2. The old woman hasn't noticed Louisa yet. That's part of the plan. For someone who's surprisingly tall, Louisa is surprisingly good at being invisible. The secret to that is knowing that you don't mean anything to anyone. That you're worthless. The woman, who feels very important and is therefore very visible, also happens to be fully occupied at the moment because she's just caught sight of the men and women talking about investments. So she snorts, "Look, Charles, apparently they let anyone in here these days, even those vulgar new money social climbers. Look at them. No taste, no style." She says new money as if it were a terrible virus. Because people like her like things to be old. She wants antique furniture and vintage wine and old money. The only things that should be new are sports cars and hip joints. The richer people like her get, the fewer things they like, until eventually they become so rich that they even hate other rich people. And that's actually the only thing Louisa almost likes about them. The woman looks at her husband in annoyance and asks, "Are you listening, Charles?" The man replies, Yes, darling, I'm listening. We'll buy that one of the sea. What's the artist's name? Sea Yacht? What sort of name is that? Do you think there are any more of those sandwiches anywhere?" No one notices when Louisa opens the backpack full of cans of spray paint. No one notices when she ducks under the rope and walks closer to the painting. She will never be able to explain what she feels when she sees it. Maybe this is what it feels like to become a parent, she thinks. There are no words. "Miss you. See you soon. Mom," it says on the postcard in the backpack. Louisa reaches down to the bottom of the bag. "You there! What do you think you're doing? You're not allowed to be that close to the painting!" a voice behind her suddenly exclaims. It's the old woman. She sounds very angry, but if one has a face where the skin has been pulled back until the cheeks start just behind the ears, it's hard for anyone else to know what one really feels. The woman pretty much has the emotional range of a lampshade. That's when Louisa stops following the plan. It isn't the plan's fault. It's just that her brain sometimes gets a bit crowded with both the genius and the non-genius having to live there together. So Louisa turns around with tears in her eyes and snaps at the woman, "It isn't a painting of the sea!" The woman quickly takes 2 steps back and stares at Louisa as if she has just been attacked by a piece of furniture. Did it just speak to her? Are you completely out of your... Step away from that painting at once, she commands, well on her way to fainting from the effrontery of it all. But Louisa remains standing calmly on the other side of the rope, blinking away her tears. She whispers, "It isn't a painting of the sea. You vulgar, new money social climber." The woman gets so angry that she almost suffocates, so she grabs her husband so hard that he chokes on a tiny sandwich and almost suffocates as well. "Charles!" the woman howls, and the old man splutters and spits bread all over her diamonds before pointing furiously at Louisa's white shirt as if he imagines his index finger can shoot fire and thereby instantly instill fear in the world around him. "You there! Stand still! I want to talk to your supervisor!" he commands. It turns out, to his horror, that Louisa isn't at all afraid of index fingers because she isn't an elevator button, so she merely replies quietly, "I don't work here." Then she searches her backpack some more until she finally finds what she's looking for. A thin, red-colored pen. "In that case, I want to talk to your parents," the old man demands, slightly disgusted, looking around for what he seems to be imagining are two chimpanzees holding an informational leaflet about contraception upside down. Only then does the woman notice Louisa's backpack, and then she understands everything, because she knows all too well what young people and backpacks mean. "Charles, she has spray paint in that bag. She's one of those activists. Get the guard, Charles, she's going to ruin the art," says the woman who wants to hang it in her ugly summer house, Louisa mutters. Then she turns around, and with her thin pen, she draws a tiny fish in red ink on the wall right next to the painting. That wasn't the plan. She was really only supposed to look at the painting. She thought that would be enough. It isn't her brain's fault that now something in her heart suddenly somehow wants the painting to know that she was here. Her and fish. Stupid, stupid heart. The woman screams in panic, and the old man hurries to fetch the guard. But it was still nice of him. That thing he said, Louisa decides. That he thought that she had parents. "See you soon, Mom," the postcard in her backpack says. On the front is a picture of the world-famous painting by C. Yacht. For as long as Louisa can remember, she's wanted to see it in real life. She used to talk about it to Fish all the time, that one day they would be here together. But now she can't even explain the feeling. Sometimes when she and Fish snuck into theaters, they would watch movies where women tried to explain what it was like to become a mother, and they always looked just as overwhelmed and lost for words. Becoming a parent? Someone said it's an invisible tidal wave that hits you with such force that you lose your breath and never quite get it back. You spend your whole life gasping, someone else said, because it's a love so immense that it squeezes the air out of your lungs. Everyone else thinks you look like the same person afterward, a third said, but you don't understand any of it because there's such a clear before and after. A completely new you. That's how the painting feels, Louisa thinks. But it was still nice of that old woman, she decides, to think that Louisa was planning to ruin the artwork. As if anything could have stopped her then. Lady, Louisa thinks, if I'd wanted to destroy the painting, this entire building would be ashes by now. I'm insanely good at destroying things, lady. Everyone I love dies. The guard comes rushing over now, or at least lumbering, a 300-pound body with a tiny, furious head perched on top. Louisa clutches the red pen tightly in her hand. She hates it when adults touch her. That's what happens if you've never met an adult you can trust. Her dad was gone before she was born. He didn't want to be a dad, but Louisa wonders if perhaps her mom had wanted to be a mom, at least for a little while. If she had felt the tidal wave when Louisa was born. "Miss you," the postcard says, in terrible handwriting. The only thing Louisa remembers about her mom is her voice singing a lullaby. They came from another country. Louisa remembered nothing about it. She never found out what they left behind, but it can't have been good if this place was better. When Louisa was 5 years old, she was left with neighbors. Her mom walked out the door and never returned. The police looked for her for a few months, but she was too good at being invisible. and that was probably the only thing her daughter inherited from her. Time is a strange concept once you've been abandoned. If you're 5 years old when your parent leaves you, the leaving didn't happen on one particular day. It happens every day. It never stops. Louisa grew up in foster homes. She only spoke her mother's language, and when she tried to imitate the other children's languages in the foster homes, they laughed at her, or worse. For a long time after that, she didn't really speak at all. She remembers that it was hard to sleep in those homes because things kept hitting the walls. Sometimes it was plates, and sometimes it was glasses, and sometimes it was people. Sometimes it was other people, and sometimes it was her. Nowhere lasted very long. She had to move several times. Some of the foster homes were creepy, some were scary, and some were dangerous. Only one was beautiful. She was 6 or 7 years old then, and of course that particular home was just as full of screaming people and silent fears as all the others, but there was a fridge in one corner of the kitchen covered with postcards of famous works of art. It was her heaven. She never found out who had bought the postcards and left them there, but it was probably someone like her, someone who had passed through the home and wanted to tell the children who came after that there was a different world out there. Art is empathy. One of the postcards was of the painting of the sea, which isn't a painting of the sea. It was the first thing Louisa ever stole, the first really beautiful thing she ever touched. One day a few years later, she arrived at a foster home where someone laughed, and it was Fish. They belonged to each other instantly. They slept so close at night, with screwdrivers in their hands, that if Louisa woke up and felt a heart beating in her chest, she couldn't tell if it was her own or Fish's. Fish taught her to understand all the different languages the other kids at the group home spoke, mostly all curse words, of course, because when it came to cursing, Fish was truly a citizen of the world. But it was when Fish snuck them into the movies that Louisa learned to speak English like the American film stars. At night, she would lie beside Fish and whisper out entire scenes from the great love stories. Still, there were a lot of words in any language she couldn't understand. One day not long after, the police rang at the door to say they had found Louisa's mom. A child's brain is peculiar. It interprets everything in its own way. Louisa had always dreamed of this, but what the police officer said was incomprehensible. Fish had to explain. Inform the relatives meant that you told the people who cared. So Louisa was the relative. Deceased meant dead. Substance abuse meant her mother had drunk herself to death. Drowned from the inside. A child's brain is so imaginative, Louisa heard this but didn't grow up afraid of alcohol, just horribly afraid of swimming. The next time they were at the movies, they saw a really old film, because Fish knew that Louisa loved those best of all, and a famous singer was playing the main role. In one scene, she sang a lullaby to a child, and Louisa suddenly recognized it. It had never been her mother's voice, she remembered. It was this. Her mother had left the 5-year-old alone with the television for so many hours that in the end, Louisa didn't know which voice was which, her mom's or the ones in the old films. She cried when she realized that she was a person without memories, but Fish sat beside her and said, "To hell with that. Why should your stupid brain get to decide what happened and what didn't? You can still keep that memory. It's yours." So Louisa kept it. Imagination is a child's only weapon. And on the back of the postcard of the painting, Louisa wrote a message, the one she would have wanted, as if she had been longed for and loved. "See you soon, Mom." She put it in her backpack and thought that one day she and Fish would see that painting in real life, and maybe then it would be like when superheroes discover their powers. If she ever got to the sea, maybe she wouldn't be scared of swimming. She imagined it would be like in fairy tales, and that in some magical way, everything would have a happy ending. It won't. But this is how her adventure begins. Three. So Louisa gets thrown out. That doesn't happen very often, actually, because most people who get thrown out are in fact led out, or perhaps dragged out. But Louisa isn't like everyone else, so she leaves the church in the air. Right before the outthrowing in question, she paints a guard, which doesn't mean that she paints a guard on a wall, but actually paints the guard himself. Unfortunately, of course, the guard does not give the impression that he is the sort of person who appreciates symbolism of that sort. He just rushes over, as angry as a wild boar that's been given a habanero suppository, and grabs her so hard that she screams. Shortly after that, he screams too. Because Louisa really, really doesn't like it when adults touch her, so she panics, and that's when she paints the guard. In her defense, it's self-defense, because the only thing she has in her hands is the pen she used to write on the wall, so she stabs the guard's lower arm with it. He has an impressive scream, somewhere between a 5-year-old who's fallen off a swing and an opera singer who's found a snake in her car. He doesn't at all appear to appreciate the irony of the fact that the pen is red and that arm is covered in the sort of cool tattooed words that guards love, so that now it looks like an angry teacher has discovered that one of those words is spelled wrong. The guard, 300 pounds without an ounce of fun, tries instead to grab hold of Louisa again, so she jumps out of the way and snatches up the first thing she finds in her backpack, a can of spray paint. It happens to be white, and the guard happens to be dressed in black, so once she's painted him from top to bottom, he looks like a really angry highway. When his fists finally close around her arms and lift both her and the backpack up into the air, the brutality is so abrupt that it feels like her collarbones snap like matchsticks. But that isn't what frightens her. It's the fact that he yells, "Call the police!" to another guard that leaves her terrified. The police scare Louisa far more than violence, so when the guard carries her toward the exit, she does what every rational person would do in that situation. She bites him on the ear. They are right by the door at the time, and the guard lets out a howl, the 300-pound crybaby, and throws Louisa and her backpack away from himself with such force that she actually flies out across the sidewalk, like the building is spitting out a watermelon seed. The last thing Louisa hears is the old woman inside crying, "Did you see? She was trying to vandalize the painting. I said so the moment I saw the backpack. She's one of those activists. They only want to spoil things, like nasty little cockroaches." The last thing Louisa yells back is, "It isn't a painting of the sea, you stupid." She has a whole series of really solid insults ready for the end of that sentence, but unfortunately she lands on the pavement and has the air knocked out of her. It hurts badly, but she doesn't have time to feel how much because the guard is already on his way after her, 300 pounds minus half an ear. "Call the police!" he yells to the other guard again, so Louisa snatches her backpack from the ground and runs. He runs after her, but of course he doesn't stand a chance. He's a grown man, and they don't have a clue about how to run. Grown men don't have enough things they're afraid of on this planet to become good at running. She races to the end of the block, then turns right, goes around a corner, and thinks about the sea. She always does that when she's frightened, so she's thinking about the sea almost all the time. It might seem strange for someone who's 17 and can't swim, and actually has never even left this city, because it's the sort of city that feels like it's closer to outer space than the sea. She's never even seen it, but she's memorized every inch of blue on that painting. It's her happiest place. The postcard is in her backpack, but she doesn't need it anymore, because she will never forget what it was like to see the painting in real life. Because what all the stupid adults think is a painting of water is actually a painting of a fishing pier. It reaches out from one corner like an outstretched tongue of concrete beneath the sky, and at the far end sit 3 teenage boys. They are so small that adults hardly ever even notice them. The artist called the painting the one of the sea, so that's all anyone looks for. The boys in the middle are hiding in plain sight. Who can paint like that? Who can punch the lungs of someone who merely sees 3 kids hanging on a wall? Who can make you smell the salt water and weep over someone else's childhood? Louisa has never met those boys, but they're her people, the only people she has left on the planet. There may be 14 in the picture, possibly almost 15. No longer children, but not yet grown up. They're painted as if the artist saw them so intensively and dreamed them so beautifully that he learned how to whisper in color. Painted by someone who must have been completely beaten to pieces inside, because no one could hold a brush so carefully otherwise. No one could paint friendship like this without first having been a completely lonely child. It is a perfect summer day, and they're sitting so close to each other. And if you look really closely, you can see that they seem to be moving. They're vibrating with laughter, as if one of them has just let loose a really, really good fart. They don't get any of that, the ignorant, useless rich people back in that old church, because they aren't in enough pain. They walk around in there, happy and content and pleased with the way the world works, so they think it's a painting of the sea. But any idiot can paint the sea. Even a happy idiot can paint the sea. This is a painting of laughter, and you can only understand that if you are full of holes, because then laughter is a small treasure. Adults will never understand that, because they don't laugh at farts. And how the hell are you supposed to trust the judgment of someone like that with something as important as art? They've never loved anything so much that it's worth being beaten up by a guard just to get to see it once in your life. Louisa's face is cold with tears as she runs, but every other part of her is on fire. At the bottom of the painting, she saw the artist's signature, and next to it, he had drawn tiny, tiny skulls. She would never have known that if she hadn't been able to stand really close to it, just once in her life. No guard would be able to beat that out of her memory, even if they tried, because now she has skulls in her whole heart. She turns right at the next corner, too, so that she ends up at the back of the old church she was just thrown out of, because the guard chasing her is just stupid enough not to think of looking there. That, too, is actually a completely perfect plan. She really is a genius. Except perhaps for the small detail that there's a homeless man standing by a trash can whom she doesn't see, so she collides with him at top speed and falls headfirst to the ground and knocks herself unconscious. So, okay, maybe not a completely perfect plan. Four. 25 years ago, in an entirely different childhood, there was a big sea. The sun shone, the summer was endless, and out into the never-ending clear blue water stretched a fishing pier, and at the end of it sat the best sort of humans. They were 14 years old, almost 15, and not to brag, but Louisa was right. It really was the most excellent fart. One of them let it loose, and the friends almost fell into the sea with laughter. That was the moment that became the painting. If you've had people who can make you laugh like that, you never forget it. If not, words are pointless. Either you have smelled a remarkable fart, or you become one of those adults who stands at an auction a quarter of a century later thinking it's a painting of the sea simply because the painting is called The One of the Sea. Adults really are out of their minds. Those teenagers, before they were in the painting, they only existed for each other. They had one summer on that pier 25 years ago, which felt like it was going to last forever, because that's how all summers must feel when you're about to turn 15. That's the age when friendship is like joining the mafia. You can't leave it. You know too much. When you're 14, you know every corner of each other, all the weakest and most fragile places, And of course you can't be allowed to become an adult with all that knowledge, because an adult would never be able to keep secrets like that. One of the teenagers farted and everyone laughed like crazy. If you only get a few summer days like that, you're truly lucky. If you only find one friend like that, you're insanely fortunate. The pier was so hot that the 14-year-olds had to sit on their backpacks to stop their buttocks from getting scorched. And if there were any gusts of wind, they were less cooling than a hairdryer in a crematorium. They were sweating so much that if they went for a swim, the sea ended up saltier. They were so hot that if they burned themselves on a cigarette, the cigarette would scream. And they laughed, dear God, how they laughed, because it was that sort of summer. Their last one together. Of course, it was never supposed to be a painting. The plan was never that anyone would see that signature at the bottom, Sea Yacht, with the skulls next to it. There really wasn't anyone who thought that fart would become a world-famous fart, and that many, many years later it would be sold at an auction for so much money that even rich old ladies would have raised their eyebrows if they had enough movement left in their faces. The kids on the pier weren't supposed to be anything at all. They were supposed to be born poor and die poor, because that's how the world is constructed. They got into fights at school and got beaten at home. They knew exactly how a key sounds in a lock when a father comes home dangerously drunk. They knew perfectly well that they were stupid and worthless because they had been told that the whole way through their childhoods. And that summer, 25 years ago, they saw death in those weeks. They were chased and assaulted. They experienced more violence than the people at that art auction 25 years later would experience in their whole lives. You aren't supposed to have any sort of future at all if you grow up that way. You certainly aren't supposed to end up a world-famous artist. But one day, that's exactly what will happen to one of those teenagers. Because in an ugly place, he was born with so much beauty inside him that it was like an act of rebellion. In a world full of sledgehammers, his art was a declaration of war. One day, one of the other teenagers, a boy named Yoar, leaned over the artist's sketch pad and whispered, as if the whole thing were magic, "Who the hell can draw so you can see what it's supposed to be, you fucking alien?" That was the closest Yoar got to saying what he really wanted to say. "I love you. I hope you know that." So the artist replied, "Thanks." That was the closest the artist got to saying what he really wanted to say to Yoar. "I love you too. I can't live without you." It was Yoar who found the competition that started it all. His mom used to take home the newspapers she found in the staff room of the nursing home where she worked, because at the end of the month it sometimes happened that Yoar's old man had to choose between buying alcohol and buying toilet paper, so it was good to have the newspapers. The first day of summer vacation, Yoar happened to read an ad in the newspaper before he wiped himself with it, and that changed everything. The following morning, he stood on the pier and explained the rules of the competition, which unfortunately wasn't easy, seeing as he was surrounded by idiots. "It's a fucking competition for young artists, and anyone can send in a fucking painting, and they hang the best fucking painting up in a fucking museum," he explained for perhaps the 7th time, possibly the 8th. "Now, do you get it?" Naturally, his friends understood perfectly well. Sometimes they just enjoyed pretending to be idiots because it was so funny when Yoar got angry. "But what do you have to paint then?" one of them asked for that very reason. "You can paint whatever the hell you want! You can paint a goddamn boat!" Yoar groaned impatiently. "But we don't have a boat," was the response. "Not paint on a boat, you moron! Paint a picture of a boat on a painting canvas, or whatever the hell it's called," Yoar snapped. Then the friend pretended to understand, only to exclaim, "But I'm not much good at painting boats, Yoar." "You won't be doing the painting," Yoar sighed. And then he finally realized that his friends were grinning, so he muttered, "Idiots, you're all idiots." The first person to stop laughing was obviously the artist. His joy never lasted very long. His skin was too thin to keep reality out. He scratched himself all over. He always did that when he was nervous. And then he whispered, "Can't we just forget about it, Yor? I can't paint the way you're supposed to for competitions like that. They're for fancy people with money. I can't." Yor interrupted impatiently. "What do you mean you can't? Stop that. You're a million times better than all those fucking rich kids. You just need to show them. Paint anything. Paint the goddamn sea." Yor said it with the best intentions. It was just that no one had taught him how to make his words sound like that. He didn't want to prove to the world how good the artist was. He wanted to prove it to the artist himself. Yor was good at mending engines, because in them he could always see what was broken, but humans are full of crap you can't see. We break in the invisible parts. So Yor didn't know how to say that he loved the artist, and instead he roared, "Just paint! Just win that fucking competition!" "It doesn't work like that," the artist whispered, because he couldn't explain why he couldn't breathe. He didn't have words for why he was so sad that summer. He scratched himself all over, and his eyes darted about. The third boy saw it and did his best to distract the others. "Paint the sea? Difficult," the boy said, and this time it was hard to tell if he was playing dumb or if he really was. "How is it difficult? It's just one color," Yor pointed out. "But it's so big. How would we get enough paper?" came the response. There was a long silence before one of them started to giggle. Then all of them broke down laughing. Even the artist, eventually, and when he did, not even Yor could be angry. That was how all the best things started. They spent the rest of the day throwing stones at each other, telling stupid jokes, and swimming. Out of all the things the artist would paint for the rest of his life, Yor was the hardest, because it was never possible to paint him the way he felt about his friend. When the sun started to go down that summer day, Yor said irritably, "You need to get away from this fucking town." "Don't say that," the artist pleaded, but then Yor got angry. "But you do. The rest of us are screwed. We're going to have shit lives, but not you. Do you hear what I'm saying? Because you're a goddamn world-famous artist. The world just doesn't know it yet. Don't forget that when all the other bastards out there know who you are. We knew you were world-famous first." Not to brag, but he was right. Then they lay on the pier and drank cheap sodas and watched the sunset for free. The summer was still endless, and the world-famous artist who wasn't world-famous yet slowly moved his finger across the sky in the last of the daylight, drawing skulls in the air. Then he asked one of the other 14-year-olds, "Do you think we'll all still be best friends when we're grown up?" Yor replied calmly, "When we're grown up, I don't think we'll all be alive." Not to brag, but he was right about that too. "5. Louisa's head hits the ground so hard that her vision goes dark. For a moment, she thinks she's dying. She's unconscious for a few seconds. For just one of those seconds, she actually thinks she can hear Fish's voice from beyond the grave. Perhaps that ought to make her happy, but it just makes her angry. Because it was Fish who promised that if they could just survive their damn childhoods, everything would be okay after that. But you are the one who was supposed to survive, not me, because you are the one who was good at being alone, Louisa yells in her head, and then opens her eyes in fear and realizes that she might have shouted it out loud. Someone hushes her, unless she imagines that. She presses her tongue against her teeth, and if she didn't know better, she'd say she had cat hair in her mouth. Then she hears the hushing again, and when she blinks up at the sky, she sees the homeless man on the other side of the trash can with a finger pressed to his lips. Louisa isn't exactly great at being hushed, she really isn't. But she keeps quiet and holds her breath when she hears the security guard yell a short distance away, "You speak English? Have you seen a girl?" Louisa sees the homeless man nod quickly and point in the other direction. The guard sighs breathlessly and turns around and runs. Or maybe runs is overstating it, but whatever it is, it's slightly quicker than his walking. The homeless man stands there until the 300 pounds of muscle and 0 ounces of detective skills finally disappear out of view. Then the man leans over Louisa behind the trash can and smiles tentatively. He has a big, red, Louisa-shaped mark on his face. Their heads must have collided. Louisa remembers running hunched over, so the man must be really short. Beside him sits a ginger cat, she sees now. The homeless man's clothes are dirty, but the cat looks surprisingly clean and well-kept for a homeless cat. The man looks frightened, but the cat just looks very annoyed, as if Louisa has spilled milk over its stamp collection. "Sorry," Louisa whispers in the English she learned from the movie stars, and tries to get to her feet, but she lurches and stumbles right into the homeless man. When they touch, they both jerk as if from an electric shock. The man falls against the trash can, and Louisa trips over the cat. The cat really doesn't look happy. Sorry, Louisa repeats as her backside lands on the ground again. The man gets laboriously to his feet, his hands are shaking badly and he seems to be in pain, but he smiles as if to say it's all right. The cat really doesn't look like it agrees with him. Louisa blushes with embarrassment when she sees that there's a broken box and dirty blanket behind the trash can, and realizes that she's blundered straight into the man's and the cat's bedroom. The man looks like he'd like to help her up, but really doesn't want to reach his hand out to her. She recognizes the body language. "You don't like it when people touch you?" she whispers. The man shakes his head apologetically. "Me neither," she says. He smiles tentatively, as does she. A short silence follows, and unfortunately Louisa is very bad at silences, so she starts babbling. That's because her brain is a bit of a bully and always tells her that if everyone else is quiet, it's probably because Louisa seems so weird, so she should definitely start babbling at once. So Louisa turns to the cat and says, "I like cats. I actually like cats more than dogs because cats are much harder to shoot." Then Louisa's brain asks her why on earth she said that. And Louisa thinks it was because her brain told her to. Then her brain answers that it's precisely this kind of stuff that makes people think you're weird, Louisa. And then Louisa feels so embarrassed that her cheeks can't hide it. It really is a bully, that brain of hers. "I mean," she mutters apologetically to the man and the cat, "that in films, gangsters always say they're going to shoot their enemies like dogs. They never say they're going to shoot them like cats, because cats would never sit still long enough." The homeless man smiles. The cat very much doesn't, but it does look like it might dislike Louisa a tiny bit less now. Louisa's brain immediately tells her to talk more, so she says, "Plus, that people who have dogs often have to stick their hands right down their throats because dogs are always eating things that can kill them. I mean, should an animal like that really survive? You never see anyone with their hand shoved inside a cat's mouth." Louisa finally falls silent, and her brain sighs in despair. The cat tilts its head and appears to be thinking of furballs. The man doesn't seem to know what to do with his hands. He looks like he's ashamed of how much they're shaking, so he puts them in his pockets. Unfortunately, then his pockets start shaking, and he looks even more ashamed of that. To his relief, Louisa doesn't appear to notice, because she's just caught sight of her backpack. The zipper must have broken when she fell, and now her whole life is lying on the pavement. The passport, the cans of spray paint, pens, sketch pads, and a pack of cigarettes. 2 screwdrivers, and all the clothes she could carry. It hits her so suddenly and so mercilessly that this is all she owns now. 17 years on the planet, and it fits inside one bag, that her skeleton just folds. As she slumps down in despair and starts to gather her things together, she has tears in her eyes, and when the man starts to help her, he does too. It takes a special sort of heart to feel like that about someone else's belongings. "Thanks," Louisa whispers, embarrassment all over her cheeks as she returns the cans of spray paint to the backpack. Then she adds shyly, "I didn't steal anything in there, just so you know. That isn't why the guard was chasing me. I'm not a thief." The man looks like he believes her, but the cat appears to harbor certain doubts, so Louisa goes on. And I didn't vandalize any paintings either. That may have been what that stupid old woman was shouting, but it isn't true. I would never do that. I was only there because I loved that painting. I just wanted to see it in real life, just once. I was supposed to see it with my best friend, but she died, and She bites her lip, and her brain starts bullying her again. So she stares down at the ground and mutters some of the worst swearing the homeless man has ever heard. And that's saying something, because he's met drunken sailors and been on boats with drunks. And once he heard a pregnant woman yelling at a traffic warden. A man has heard quite a few swear words then. He is therefore able to conclude that this young woman is unusually gifted. Louisa curses and curses and curses. Then suddenly she starts crying so violently that her whole body shakes, because she had a completely perfect plan this morning, and it definitely didn't include her standing in an alley behind a church, crying so hard that a homeless cat gets snot on its fur. Sorry, she sniffs. The cat looks a little disgusted at the thought of having to wash its fur with its tongue now. The man awkwardly gets to his feet, the knees of his pants even dirtier than before, and holds out her passport. It's open to the page with her photograph so he can see her name and date of birth. He opens his mouth, but the sound that comes out is so quiet that it hardly sounds like words, more like the rustling of wind through leaves. Louisa. Nice name. Happy birthday. Louisa takes her passport, carefully, as if it has a heartbeat. It was Fish's idea that she get a passport, even though they both knew they would never travel anywhere, because Fish said that a passport is proof that you exist. Now that Fish is gone, it feels like the only proof Louisa has left. My birthday isn't until tomorrow, she says. I might not see you tomorrow, the man whispers, with kind eyes and a tender smile. She realizes that his voice doesn't sound quiet like that because he's shy, but because he's ill. It hurts him to talk. She doesn't know what to say then. And that's obviously never a good start for her brain. But in Louisa's defense, no one has ever wished her a happy birthday except for Fish. It isn't so easy to sort out all your emotions when a stranger suddenly does it. Say something smart, her brain is yelling. But instead, Louisa manages to say, the guard said he was going to call the police. That's why I ran, not because I've done anything wrong. Her brain points out that the homeless man probably doesn't care, but suddenly Louisa cares very much what he thinks. As if it would be a comfort if at least one single person and one single cat in the whole world didn't have only negative thoughts about her. So everything just tumbles out of her. It's just that I've run away. I mean, I'm homeless, but not homeless the way you are, not homeless in a way that you should feel sorry for me. I'm homeless on purpose. I mean, I ran away from the place where I was living, so I've probably been reported missing. But I had to because it isn't a good place to sleep alone, you know? And I heard the adults talking about my best friend Fish dying, and they said it was just as well. They said she was crazy and dangerous, and that the best thing she could do for the world was to not be in it. So I had to run away, because otherwise I would have killed the idiots who said that. Because Fish wasn't crazy. She was the best at nearly everything, and she was my human. She was my human. She was my human. And now she's dead, and no one even cares. No one even remembers her. So I ran, because if the police catch me, they'll send me back to the foster home because I'm a minor, reported missing. But tomorrow's my 18th birthday, and then I won't be missing anymore. I'll just be gone. Her brain tells her over and over again that she's babbling too much, but Louisa's heart is too exhausted to listen to anything higher up now. It's one of the last days before Easter. The weather is like winter and spring are fighting over the temperature like two annoying siblings. One minute the sun is shining, the next an icy wind is finding its way through the alley and under her shirt. So she says, nodding toward the blanket and box, I sleep in cars, it's a bit warmer. Plus that I like the sound when you lock the doors from inside. She feels ashamed at once because she realizes that the homeless man can't break into cars when his hands are shaking, and besides, he might not have had a friend like Fish who taught him how to do it. Louisa feels sorry for him. She feels sorry for anyone who didn't have Fish. The homeless man stands silently in front of her for a long time, before that rustling sound comes from his throat again, the softest voice she's ever heard. "I'm sorry." So she whispers back sadly, "I'm sorry too, for whatever has happened to you." His eyes look moist and he sniffs, and the cat moves cautiously to the side so it doesn't get more snot on its fur. Neither Louisa nor her brain know what to do with the silence that follows, so she takes a deep breath and holds something out to him. The man takes it, surprised. A postcard. The painting in the picture there, that's what I broke into the church to see. Tears are running down her cheeks, but she looks almost peaceful, or at least as peaceful as anyone can look if they've just been crying on a cat. "I sometimes think," she whispers to the postcard, "that the artist who painted all that must have been in so much pain, but he must also have been the world's happiest person. It's like he must have felt every single feeling inside himself all at the same time, and it must have been almost unbearable, because otherwise no one would be able to paint like that. You know?" Her brain is screaming at her that she actually seems super weird now, but it's a bit late for that, so she goes on. "Do you see the kids out on the pier? People think it's a painting of the sea, but it's actually a painting of them. And those kids, they're in all the artists' paintings. He never painted them again, but if you know they're there, you can sort of feel them everywhere anyway. My friend Fish and I always used to talk about going there one day, jumping from that pier. I was going to learn to swim there." Those last words are barely audible over her sobbing. The homeless man looks as if he'd like to hug the postcard as compensation for the difficulty he feels hugging people. He hands it back carefully, but Louisa shakes her head. "You can keep it," she says, because she's seen the real thing now. It's in her brain and her heart forever. No one can take it from her. "I always think that those kids were poor, like me. But now the artist's paintings get sold for millions, so now he's world famous and really rich and doesn't have to be afraid of anything anymore." Louisa mumbles, as if trying to hide her envy. The man looks very envious too, holding onto the postcard. Louisa gets the pack of cigarettes out. Fish was really the one who smoked, but she puts one in her mouth anyway. She offers the pack to the man, and he takes one very hesitantly. Louisa can't help thinking that's a kind thing to do, taking the risk of getting lung cancer out of sheer politeness. "Do you smoke?" she asks. He shakes his head amiably. "Good," Louisa says, "because I don't have a lighter." Since Fish died, she just likes holding cigarettes, feeling them between her lips sometimes. Just as she's about to explain that to the man, she sees that his hands are shaking so badly that he can barely hold his. So she asks, in a voice as full of sympathy as it is of curiosity, "Are you an alcoholic? Is that why you're shaking?" The man says nothing for so long that she's about to apologize, but then his head moves slowly from side to side and he replies, No, I don't drink. I spill nearly all of it." It takes so long for Louisa to realize that this is a joke that her laughter comes out twice as hard. She hasn't laughed like that since Fish was still here. The man looks so happy at having been the cause of that wonderful sound that the next joke comes almost without effort. It's no laughing matter. I lost my job because of this." "What job did you do?" Louisa asks, surprised. "Tambourine thief," he smiles. Oh, how she giggles. Oh, oh, oh. The best sound in the world. She waves her hand in the air and exclaims, Is that why you don't smoke? Because you always stub your cigarette out by mistake? Are you really homeless, or do you just keep losing your keys? Oh, how he chuckles at that. Louisa wishes she could say something else just as funny, but her brain is useless, so instead she says, "Are you ill?" He nods, but without sadness. "Yes." "Are you dying?" she asks. Because he actually looks like he is, as if he might get blown apart if the wind changes direction. He nods again, but he only looks sad because she looks sad. With a voice full of solace, the man says out of nowhere, "Life is long, Louisa. Everyone will tell you that it's short, but they're lying. It's a long, long life." She can barely keep her balance, hearing that. It's honestly quite a lot to take in from a stranger, all in one go, isn't it? Particularly when you haven't spoken to a single human being at all for a very long time. She puts on her backpack just so she can hold on to the straps.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.